10 daily systems, the ancient world silently walked away from, leaving zero explanation behind. Something is wrong. You can feel it when you look at the ruins. Not the beauty of them, not the age of them, the wrongness. Because these were not primitive structures built by people who didn't know better. These were systems, complex, engineered, optimized over centuries. Systems that a modern civil engineer would look at and say, we couldn't do that today. And they weren't lost in war. They weren't destroyed in a single catastrophe. They were abandoned quietly, without explanation, 10 times, in 10 different places, across thousands of years of human history. This is not a list of mysteries. This is a record of silence. Before we begin, understand one thing. The 10 systems in this video were not experiments. They were not early attempts at technology that simply didn't work. These were daily systems, the kind of systems that cities depended on every single morning, the kind of knowledge that tens of thousands of ordinary people used without thinking the way you use running water, electricity, a road. You don't think about the system, you just use it. And when the ancient world walked away from these 10 systems, it was not because something better replaced them. In most cases, nothing replaced them. The cities that lost their water infrastructure went without clean water. The armies that lost their secret weapon went without it. The sailors who lost the art of making their strongest material built with weaker material instead. And the world quietly became less capable, less sophisticated, less alive with the accumulated brilliance of generations. And no one wrote down why. That is what this video is about. Not just what was lost, but the silence that replaced it. System 1, the Indus Valley Urban Sewage Network. Close your eyes and picture a city. Streets laid out in perfect grids. Standardized baked bricks, every single one the same dimensions, as if produced from the same mold, across an entire civilization spanning over 1 million square kilometers. Public wells positioned at regular intervals. A great public bath, waterproofed with bitumen, fed by fresh water, drained by a system of channels. And beneath every street, beneath every home, running silently under the feet of 40,000 people, a network of covered brick sewage drains, connected, maintained, inspected, functioning. This was Mohenjo-daro, a city built by the Indus Valley civilization, a culture that flourished from approximately 3300 BCE to 1300 BCE across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. And the sewage system they built was not primitive. It was, by the technical standards of urban sanitation, the most advanced system on Earth at the time. Every household toilet drained into a street-level channel. Every street channel connected to larger municipal drains. Drain covers, removable brick slabs, allowed maintenance workers to access the system for cleaning. Overflow pits, settling chambers, inspection points. This system had features that European cities would not standardize until the 1850s, when the Great Stink of London finally forced the construction of modern sewers. The citizens of Mohenjo-daro had better sanitation than Victorian London 3,000 years earlier, and then, around 1900 BCE, the maintenance stopped. Not the city, not the people, just the maintenance. Archaeologists excavating the later layers of Mohenjo-daro find a city still inhabited, still active, but with drains that are silting, drain covers that are not being replaced, channels filling with debris that is no longer being cleared. The people were still there. The system was dying around them, and they did not fix it. Here is what makes this case uniquely frustratingly silent. The Indus script found on thousands of seals, tablets, and pottery shards across the civilization has never been deciphered. Over a century of attempts, computational analysis, statistical modeling, comparative linguistics, we cannot read a single word. Every administrative record, every decision made at the governmental level, every instruction, every debate, every crisis document about the failing infrastructure, locked behind a language that has never been opened. The silence is not metaphorical, it is absolute. System 2 Roman concrete walk to the harbor at Caesarea Maritima today. Stand at the edge where the ancient Roman breakwater still extends into the Mediterranean. That concrete was poured 2,000 years ago, poured directly into the sea, and it is, by measurable chemical analysis, still getting stronger. Modern Portland cement, the concrete we use to build everything from apartment blocks to highway overpasses, begins degrading within decades when exposed to seawater. Salt crystals grow inside the matrix, expand, and crack the material from within. Sea walls built in the 20th century are already failing. Roman harbor concrete does the opposite. In 2017, researchers at MIT, UC Berkeley, and institutions in Italy published findings that explained exactly why. When seawater percolates through Roman concrete made from a mixture of volcanic pozzolana ash, lime, and seawater, a chemical reaction produces a mineral called tobermorite within the matrix. Tobermorite crystals grow slowly inside the concrete, interlocking with the aggregate, filling microcracks, binding the structure more tightly with every passing decade. The concrete does not weaken with age. It heals itself. This is not an accident of Roman engineering. The Romans specifically sought volcanic ash from the region around Pozzuoli, near Naples, and transported it across the empire to construction sites. They knew this particular ash produced exceptional results. They did not know the chemistry. They knew the outcome, and they used it to build an empire. Harbors, aqueducts, the Pantheon, baths, breakwaters, foundations of temples that are still standing after 2 millennia. Then the Western Roman Empire collapsed, not in a single dramatic moment over decades of administrative fragmentation. The tax system that funded imperial infrastructure failed. The guilds that trained master builders dissolved. The supply chains that moved volcanic ash from Pozzuoli to construction sites across 3 continents ceased to function. The architectural writer Vitruvius had, in the 1st century BCE, described the use of volcanic ash in construction. His 10 books on architecture survived. They were copied in monasteries through the medieval period. They were available to medieval builders, but Vitruvius assumed his readers already knew the craft. He described the material. He did not give the ratios. He did not describe the curing process that Roman concrete was poured, in many cases, directly into seawater and left to cure slowly over years, a timeline completely incompatible with any medieval or modern construction project. Medieval builders read Vitruvius. Medieval concrete crumbled. The knowledge was in the text, but the text was missing the most important part. It had assumed the reader was already standing in a Roman workshop, with a master builder's hands on their shoulders. That master builder was dead, and had been dead for centuries. System 3 Greek fire in the summer of 674 CE, an Arab fleet appeared before the walls of Constantinople. The most powerful naval force the Arab Caliphate had assembled, hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of soldiers. The city should have fallen. Instead, the Byzantine defenders deployed a weapon that the Arab chroniclers could not explain, a liquid fire launched from bronze tubes mounted on warships, a fire that burned on the surface of the water, a fire that water could not extinguish that burned harder when doused, a fire that clung to wood, to rope, to men. The Arab fleet was destroyed. The siege was broken. Constantinople survived. And over the following 4 centuries, Greek fire deployed again in 717 CE, in 941 CE, and in dozens of smaller engagements, became the decisive military advantage of the Byzantine Empire. The shield that kept the empire alive against enemies who should, by weight of numbers and resources, have overwhelmed it long before they did. Arab soldiers who survived its deployment described throwing themselves into the sea to escape burning and continuing to burn in the water. And the formula? It was protected with a secrecy so aggressive that it ultimately consumed itself. Byzantine emperors maintained a classified manufacturing operation around Greek fire, unlike anything in the ancient world. The production was compartmentalized, deliberately divided, so that no single person outside the manufacturing unit possessed the complete process. Soldiers who deployed it knew only how to operate the equipment, not what was inside it. Ambassadors who inquired about it were turned away. Attempts by foreign powers to obtain the formula through bribery were recorded and prosecuted. Historians believe production may have been maintained by a single family lineage, possibly descended from Kallinikos, a Syrian architect who is credited in Byzantine sources with introducing the weapon in the 670s CE. When the political instability of the 11th and 12th centuries disrupted imperial institutional continuity, That family disappears from the historical record, and the formula disappears with them. Modern chemists have worked backward from the historical accounts for centuries. The leading hypothesis involves a petroleum-based crude naphtha combined with quicklime, which reacts violently with water, and possibly pine resin and sulfur. But no modern reconstruction has produced a substance that burns the way Byzantine chronicles describe. Nothing reproduces the accounts of fire spreading across an entire harbor. Either the accounts were exaggerated, or the formula contained something we have not yet identified, something that died with the last person who knew it. System 4 Damascus steel European Crusader knights brought stories home from the Holy Land that were not believed. They described Arab blades that could cut a falling silk scarf in half, blades that held a razor edge through an entire day of combat, blades with a surface like flowing water, dark rippling lines through bright metal that no European smith could reproduce regardless of technique. They were not exaggerating. Damascus. Steel produced in workshops across Syria and Persia using raw material called woots, imported from southern India, was not merely superior to European iron. It was operating on a different physical principle. In 2006, a team of German researchers examined historical Damascus blades under transmission electron microscopy. They found carbon nanotubes within the microstructure of the steel. Carbon nanotubes, a material that 21st century nanotechnology researchers work deliberately to synthesize in laboratory conditions, forming naturally. In a smelting process developed in pre-medieval Persia. The nanotube formation is what gave Damascus steel its paradoxical combination of extreme hardness and extreme flexibility, properties that conventional metallurgy says cannot coexist in the same material. They coexisted in Damascus steel because the material was operating at the nanoscale in a way its makers did not know and did not need to know. What they knew was the process. The woots ingots imported from the Golconda region of southern India were processed through repeated cycles of heating to specific temperatures and controlled cooling. The smiths understood these temperatures through color, the color of the glowing metal, the behavior of the material under the hammer, not through measurement. And the specific ore from the Golconda region is what made everything possible. The trace mineral impurities, particularly vanadium, acted as a catalyst for the structure that produced the legendary blade. Without the right ore from the right region, with the right trace mineral profile, the technique produced ordinary steel. In the mid-18th century, the trade routes supplying Golconda ore shifted. The technique that had worked for over a millennium suddenly stopped producing the right result. The smiths did not know why. They had never understood why in chemical terms. And so the last Damascus blades were forged sometime in the mid-1700s by smiths who were confused and frustrated by a technique that had simply stopped working for reasons they could not diagnose. And then they made do with ordinary steel. And the blades that could cut silk were never made again. System 5, the Antikythera Mechanism in 1901. Sponge divers off the Greek island of Antikythera pulled from the wreck of an ancient cargo ship a corroded lump of bronze and decayed wood approximately the size of a shoebox. It was sent to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. It sat in a storage box for decades. Nobody knew what they had. In the 1950s, a British science historian named Derek de Sala Price became obsessed with the object. He spent years studying it, and in 1959 published a paper that made an extraordinary claim. The object was a mechanical computer, built in ancient Greece, designed to model the movements of the solar system. The academic community resisted, and their resistance was not irrational. The mechanical complexity Price was describing was simply not supposed to exist in that period. The technology implied by this object was not supposed to appear in human history for another 1,400 years. It was not until the early 2000s, when CT scanning technology became available, that the full internal structure of the mechanism could be mapped without destroying it. What the scans revealed silenced every remaining skeptic. 37 precision bronze gears, interlocking in a configuration of extraordinary mechanical sophistication. The mechanism could track the 19-year cycle after which the phases of the moon repeat on the same calendar dates. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses centuries in advance. It modeled the irregular motion of the moon using a gear system that is a physical analog of advanced mathematical calculation. It synchronized the Egyptian civil calendar with the Greek lunar calendar simultaneously. It tracked the cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. This was not a demonstration piece. This was a working instrument, designed for daily use. And here is the fact that haunts every researcher who has studied this object. We have found no other one. Not a fragment of a second device, not a drawing, not a written description, not a reference in any surviving ancient text to a workshop that produced such devices. The device appeared. Someone used it. It sank, and whatever tradition produced it left nothing else behind. System 6 Maya astronomical calculation. The Maya did not simply observe the sky. They had been observing it systematically and continuously for over 1,000 years. And what they built from those observations was not merely knowledge. It was a precision instrument. Their calendar system, 3 interlocking cycles operating simultaneously, gave Maya astronomers a framework of extraordinary accuracy for tracking astronomical events. The Venus tables preserved in the Dresden Codex chart the synodic cycle of Venus across 384 years of observation. Modern astronomers who have checked these tables find them accurate to within 2 minutes over that entire period. 2 minutes, across nearly 4 centuries of continuous observation, without telescopes, without electronic measurement, using naked eye observation, patient record keeping across generations, and a mathematical framework for prediction and correction that modern astronomers describe with genuine admiration. And this was not the work of isolated genius. It was institutional. It was daily. A specialized priestly class, the astronomer priests, whose training began in childhood and continued across their entire lives, maintained these calculations as operational infrastructure. Agricultural planting dates, flood predictions, religious ceremony timing, political decisions, military campaigns. All of it ran on astronomical calculation. The classic Maya collapse between 800 and 1000 CE saw the abandonment of dozens of major urban centers. The priestly institutions scattered. Some knowledge survived in the cities of the northern Yucatan. Then the Spanish arrived. In July of 1562, in the town of Mani in the Yucatan Peninsula, a Franciscan friar named Diego de Landa conducted what he called an autodafé. He had collected every Maya codex, every bark paper book that his missionaries could find. He burned them, all of them. Thousands of books, centuries of recorded observation, the accumulated astronomical knowledge of a civilization that had been watching the sky with methodical precision for over a millennium, gone in an afternoon. De Landa later wrote in a detailed account of Maya culture that became, with savage irony, one of our primary sources for understanding what was destroyed, that the books contained nothing but superstition and lies of the devil. He described watching the Maya people weep as their books burned. He seemed to find this evidence that the destruction was necessary. Of the entire written record of Maya civilization, 4 books survive today. 4. What was in the others? We will never know. System 7 Egyptian faience glazing. Walk through the Egyptian collection of any major museum. Look at the small objects, the amulets, the small servant figures buried with the dead, the decorative tiles, the jewelry. Look at the color: turquoise, cobalt blue, deep green, saturated in a way that modern ceramic glazes are not, luminous in a way that seems to come from inside the object rather than from its surface. This is Egyptian. Faience, a glazed ceramic produced in Egypt from at least 3500 BCE and manufactured continuously for over 3,000 years. Modern ceramic artists and materials scientists who have studied ancient faience describe a quality in the original glaze, a specific optical depth, the way light enters the glaze and reflects from multiple internal layers, rather than from the surface alone, that no modern reproduction has matched. Ancient faience appears to glow from within. The difference between an ancient faience amulet and a modern reproduction is visible to the naked eye, and the reason for that difference involves precise firing temperatures, exact glaze composition ratios, and surface preparation techniques whose details were never written down, because they didn't need to be written down. In a workshop where the master had been making faience for 40 years, where apprentices learned by watching and doing for years before they were trusted with a finished piece, The temperature was known by the color of the kiln interior. The glaze consistency was known by feel. The preparation was known by touch. In the late Roman period, as Egypt transitioned under Roman and then Byzantine administration, the old temple workshop system, through which craft knowledge had been transmitted for millennia, was systematically dismantled. The workshops closed. The last masters died. The last true Egyptian faience was produced sometime around the 4th century CE. After 3,500 years of continuous production, the objects that survive glow in museum cases around the world, and no living person knows how to make them glow that way. System 8 Nabatean rainwater harvesting the Negev Desert, one of the most inhospitable landscapes on Earth. Annual rainfall, approximately 100 millimeters, less than half of London, less than a quarter of New York. And yet, between approximately 100 BCE and 600 CE, the Nabatean civilization, the Arab trading culture whose rock-carved capital of Petra remains one of the most astonishing urban achievements in human history, ran agriculture at scale in the Negev: wheat, barley, grapes for wine, olives, pomegranates, fields, orchards, vineyards, in a desert, not through irrigation from distant rivers, not through any external water source, through rain. 100 millimeters of rain per year. The Nabateans engineered entire watersheds, hillsides, spanning kilometers, into passive water collection systems of extraordinary sophistication. Low stone walls were built across hillsides at precisely calculated angles, not perpendicular to the slope, which would cause erosion, but at a slight diagonal that directed runoff laterally into collection channels. Collection channels fed cisterns deep, plastered underground chambers capable of holding thousands of liters, sealed against evaporation. Cisterns fed agricultural terraces designed to retain moisture for weeks after a rainfall event. The entire system was calibrated to capture not just rainfall directly on the field at 100 millimeters per year that would barely support life, but runoff from the surrounding hillsides. A well-designed Nabatean watershed could collect rainfall from an area 20 times the size of the agricultural plot it served. Modern Israeli engineers have reconstructed portions of these systems in the Negev and demonstrated that they function exactly as the Nabateans designed them. The engineering is completely sound. The water harvests are real. But in approximately 600 CE, the wars that exhausted both the Byzantine and Persian empires disrupted the trade networks that had supported Nabatean urban centers. The population dispersed. The communities that had maintained the watershed systems, clearing channels, repairing terrace walls, managing cistern integrity, scattered. Without maintenance, the system silted within years. The terraces eroded. The desert reclaimed the fields. The knowledge of how to build and operate an entire watershed at civilization scale, calibrating hundreds of kilometers of diversion channels to work together as a single integrated system, that knowledge died with the communities that had spent centuries refining it. System 9, the linothorax Greek flexible composite armor, Alexander the Great wore it at Gaugamela. The decisive battle of 331 BCE, in which Alexander's forces, outnumbered by perhaps 5-1 by the Persian army of Darius III, achieved a military victory that remains one of the most analyzed tactical events in military history. Alexander wore linothorax armor into that battle, not bronze plate, not chainmail, layers of linen. The linothorax depicted on hundreds of surviving Greek vases, sculptures, and reliefs was a torso defense made from layers of linen laminated together, sometimes reinforced with bronze scales at critical points, shaped to the body and hardened into a structure that ancient military accounts consistently describe as lighter than metal plate armor, more flexible and highly effective against the weapons of its era. Ancient sources describe soldiers able to move, run, and fight with a freedom impossible in heavy bronze plate. Modern experimental archaeologists have studied the linothorax seriously for decades. We know the general structure. What is not understood is the specific adhesive composition, the precise number of layers, the layering sequence, and the finishing process that gave the completed armor its structural properties. And here is the fundamental problem. No original linothorax survives. Not one. Because it was made of organic materials, linen and glue, it has decomposed completely in every burial and archaeological context, it might have occupied. Unlike bronze helmets and breastplates, which can survive 2,500 years in the right soil conditions, organic composite armor leaves nothing. We have images. We have brief written references. We have no object as. Hellenistic and Roman military culture shifted toward different armor types. Demand for linothorax production declined. The workshops closed. The craftspeople moved to other work. The knowledge that had protected the soldiers of classical Greece, including, on the day that changed the ancient world forever, Alexander himself, was simply not considered worth writing down. It was daily work, ordinary craft, until it wasn't. System 10, Roman aqueduct maintenance and hydraulic engineering in 97 CE, a Roman official named Sextus Julius Frontinus was appointed administrator of Rome's public water supply. He was appalled by what he found: illegal tapping of the aqueducts, administrative corruption, maintenance backlogs, a system of extraordinary complexity being managed with insufficient oversight. He spent 2 years investigating, and then he wrote a book. He calculated that Rome's 11 aqueducts delivered, daily, approximately 1 million cubic meters of water into the city. 1 million cubic meters, every day, to a population of over 1 million people. The water fed 856 public baths, over 1,200 public fountains throughout the city, the private homes of the wealthy, workshops, bakeries, tanneries, every industry that required water access. And this system was not self-maintaining. The Aquarii, specialized maintenance workers employed by the Imperial Water Authority, walked the lengths of the aqueducts continuously, inspecting channels, repairing leaks, clearing mineral deposits that gradually reduced flow capacity, managing the complex distribution network within the city. An aqueduct untended for a single season would begin to degrade. Untended for 5 years, it would fail. The system required continuous human attention from workers who understood every section of every aqueduct, intimately knew where the weak points were, knew what the signs of impending failure looked like, knew how to maintain flow rates through the complex hydraulic balancing of a citywide pressurized water distribution network. As the Western Roman Empire fragmented across the 5th century CE, the institutional infrastructure of the water system collapsed in sequence. The tax base that funded the Aquarii disappeared. The administrative offices dissolved. The training programs that produced new hydraulic specialists lost their institutional support. Frontinus had written about administration and policy. He had not written a maintenance manual. He assumed the Aquarii already knew how to maintain it. By 537 CE, when the Gothic king Vitiges cut the aqueducts during the siege of Rome, most of the system was already failing. The population of Rome had collapsed from over 1 million to approximately 20,000 people. The baths had closed. The fountains had dried. The city that had defined civilization as the ancient world understood, it was surviving on spring water and the Tiber River. It would not have running water comparable to what Rome had in the year 100 CE again for over 1,000 years. Not because the engineering was forgotten, entirely Frontinus's book survived. Because the living knowledge, the daily, practical, embodied knowledge of the men who had kept it running was gone. 10 systems, 10 different places, thousands of years of human time. And the same silence at the end of each one. Not a war, not a natural disaster, not a single catastrophic event, just the slow, quiet breaking of human chains. Because every one of these systems, every one was held, not in books or archives or official records. It was held in people, in the hands of drain maintenance workers who walked the same channels every morning for 40 years, in the eyes of concrete mixers who knew by color and texture whether the volcanic ash had been incorporated correctly, in the muscle memory of steel smiths who had spent a lifetime learning to read a glowing coal fire, in the minds of astronomer priests who had been trained since childhood in a mathematical tradition older than any living teacher could trace, in the quiet competence of water workers who walked 50 kilometers of aqueduct channel every week and knew every weakness in every meter of it. These were not unusual people. They were workers. They were craftspeople. They were the ordinary human beings on whose daily labor every ancient civilization depended for its survival. And history, official history, The history of kings and wars and philosophers and emperors did not consider them worth recording. Their names do not survive. Their techniques do not survive. Their understanding, accumulated across generations, transmitted person to person in the only reliable way practical knowledge has ever been transmitted, does not survive because the chain broke. War, plague, conquest, political disruption, trade route collapse. The deliberate burning of a civilization's books on an afternoon in 1562 by a man who was certain he was doing God's work. The chain broke, and no one had written it down, because no one had needed to write it down, because there had always been someone to teach it to, until there wasn't. They did not know they were the last drain worker in Mohenjo-daro, walking his channels, the last Roman concrete master watching his students mix volcanic ash, the last keeper of the Greek fire formula in a city beginning to fracture with no authorized successor and no permission to create one, the last Damascus smith whose hands knew the color of the right temperature, the last Maya astronomer priest whose memory held the tables that had just been burned. They did not know. History rarely announces its endings. It does not sound an alarm. It does not pause. It simply continues. And the knowledge that was carried in a person's hands and eyes and daily practice continues with them into the ground. And one ordinary morning, in a city that is still standing, in a workshop that still smells of metal and fire, in a channel that still carries water, someone wakes up, goes to work, and realizes, for the first time, that no one taught them what comes next. That is how the ancient world walked away from its systems. Not with a decision, not with an explanation, with a morning, just an ordinary morning when the last person who knew was gone, and the silence that replaced them has lasted ever since.